CLNS Media Podcast Network. Drop your questions in the chat as we wait for some people to roll in here. We're going to answer all your questions eventually. Alex, I wanted to start here. I'm not going to go on a rant about Roger Goodell, even though I really want to right now. I wanted to start with the quarterback carousel, though. The latest, Derek Carr, maybe on the trading block, maybe on the market, maybe not on the market. But what are your feelings? I think we're both in agreement that the starting price of 2 first-round picks is absolutely insane. But just in terms of him as a player, where are you on Derek Carr?
Yeah, I think that I'll just start first with the overarching. I think you're going to see a lot of teams put borderline quarterbacks on the market right now. I think you'll see it with Jimmy Garoppolo. I think you might see it with Kirk Cousins. Those sorts of situations, just because teams saw the return for Matthew Stafford and they're thinking, well, I want some of that, right? It's like what's going on in the stock market. It gets hot, so everybody wants in on it. I don't know how, not every quarterback that gets put on the trade block in the next month is going to be traded. And I think Carr is the first of a handful. So I'm not going to overhype that. As for Carr as a player, I mean, he's a nice piece. I'm not overly excited. You're right. The 2 first-round picks is too much. Where I look at this in relation to the Patriots, and we talked about this on Tuesday, is for them to get a guy like a Jimmy Garoppolo, there has to be a trickle-down effect, right? So maybe San Francisco likes Carr, and then they get Carr, and then Jimmy Garoppolo becomes available, something like that. But I'm not, going to do jumping jacks and say the offseason is saved because the Raiders are thinking about trading Carr.
Right, and I think the biggest thing with these asking prices is that it's nice to ask for 2 first-round picks. You're not going to actually get 2 first-round picks for Derek Carr. And I think
I have an old PlayStation. I can ask you for $500 for it. Doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Right. And
unless you want to. I mean, the offer stands, but
no, I'm all good. But then the other thing is that you have the trickle-down effect that you mentioned of the Raiders are not out there actively seeking a trade for Derek Carr unless they can upgrade at the quarterback position themselves. So maybe they feel, and I think the report that was out there was that they were going to try to take whatever they get from Derek Carr and package their own picks together to make a move for Deshaun Watson. But if they don't feel like that other shoe is going to drop, then you don't just trade Derek Carr with nothing left, to leave yourself empty-handed.
But actually, it's interesting you said that because you're a big Marcus Mariota guy.
I am a big Marcus.
He obviously had his moments. You don't think they'd trade Derek Carr for, if you can get 2 firsts for Derek Carr, if you think Mariota is only a marginal decrease and those 2 first-round picks will help you more than that gap between Carr and Mariota, you don't think they might look to just do that? I wouldn't. But you being as high on Mariota as you are, I'm a little interested that you're not going to kind of flirt with that possibility as well.
I would if a team comes in and offers the Raiders a Godfather offer for Derek Carr and they do offer multiple firsts or multiple high picks, then maybe you could talk yourself into Mariota replacing Carr. And like you said, it's not that big of a drop off from one to the other, and you can have that conversation. But I think with Mariota in Carr, to me, it looks a lot like what Mariota dealt with Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee a few years ago, where Mariota, because of his pedigree, because of his history with the club, was the starter to start the season. It didn't go well. They make the switch to Ryan Tannehill, and the following offseason is when they decide to move on from Marcus Mariota. So I actually feel like the Raiders and the Patriots, as a domino effect, are maybe 1 year too early on this Derek Carr conversation. Maybe we're having this conversation next offseason when Marcus Mariota unseats Derek Carr as the starter.
If not when.
Okay, fair enough. If Marcus Mariota unseats Derek Carr. But the one thing I wanted to mention about Derek Carr is I personally feel like Derek Carr has a chance to be a team's Alex Smith. And what I mean by that is he can come in and he can be a serviceable placeholder, somebody that you can win 10, 11 games with. You surround him with the right guys and then develop guys around him. And then like the Chiefs did with Alex Smith, when you can get that Patrick Mahomes level quarterback, that's when you move on. And I feel like Derek Carr could be that for the Pats. He's not the long-term answer. He's not a Super Bowl bound quarterback. You're not automatically a Super Bowl favorite by trading for Derek Carr, but you're a lot better off than you are now. And you can bring Derek Carr in, and then you don't feel as desperate to make that big splash move, whether it's in the draft or in a trade or free agency at that quarterback position, because you do have somebody that is at least starting caliber. This was the guy that was a top 15 quarterback in the league last year. He's no slouch, and he's not Jimmy Garoppolo, who's always hurt either. He's a pretty consistent guy that's out there every single week. I think he's only missed 2 regular season starts. I know he missed that playoff start in the 1 year they did make the postseason, but he's only missed 2 regular season starts since he became the Raiders starting quarterback. So he is, to me, a more durable Jimmy Garoppolo that's on a similar sort of path in terms of what they bring to the table as quarterbacks. And he could be here for an extended period of time until the Patriots want to make that big move, whether it's a move up in the draft or sign a free agent quarterback or trade for a big money quarterback. And I would take Derek Carr over a lot of other options in the field that we're going to be faced with and that we're going to throw out there, like Derek Carr versus Cam. I'm taking Derek Carr. Derek Carr versus Ryan Fitzpatrick. I'm taking Derek Carr. Derek Carr over Jimmy Garoppolo. I'm taking Derek Carr all day, every day. So that's where I feel a little bit with Derek Carr where we're at. And it's going to be interesting, though, because the dominoes need to fall. Ryan Fitzpatrick, and again, ask your questions in the chat, and we'll start answering a bunch of them here in a second. I wanted to talk about Ryan Fitzpatrick, too, who said, I can't be as picky as Matthew Stafford. I would definitely welcome a move to the Patriots if that's what's in the cards for me. Where do you stand on now? Because I'm a little bit lukewarm on Fitzpatrick. I think a lot of people overrate him just a little bit because he's a fun guy to root for. It's Mania, it's Fitzmagic. But really, when you look at his career, he's only had 1 winning season as a starting quarterback.
Well, how many? We had this argument last week. How many seasons has he started more than 8 games?
Well, that tells you a lot, though, right? That no team, other than the Jets for a couple of years, and I think Buffalo for a couple of years in 2011 and stuff like that, not a lot of teams have hitched their wagon and said Ryan Fitzpatrick is our starter.
Right, but I'm not signing Ryan Fitzpatrick to, like, I think you're misinterpreting the point of Ryan Fitzpatrick. I'm not signing Ryan Fitzpatrick to say, that's my guy, let's go win football games with Ryan Fitzpatrick. I'm signing Ryan Fitzpatrick because I know I'm going to have a young quarterback coming in, and I want a guy who's been around the league. I want a guy who has experience that he can share, and he can work with this younger quarterback, and he can teach him. That's why I'm bringing in Ryan Fitzpatrick. I'm not bringing him in to start 16 games. Right. I'm bringing him in to do exactly what the Dolphins just did. I'm bringing him in to start until the bye and then hand over the keys and just have him teach the next guy. So I'm not worried about. And look, he is fun to watch. I won't discount that. After the year we just had, it would be nice to have a fun quarterback to watch. I'm not bringing in Ryan Fitzpatrick as like the guy, right? I'm not bringing in Ryan Fitzpatrick in the same context I'd bring in Derek Carr. I'm not bringing him in the same context I think the Patriots would bring in Jimmy Garoppolo. I would use Jimmy Garoppolo in the way I just described Fitzpatrick. I don't think the Patriots would. I'm not like, that's a different tier. If they sign Ryan Fitzpatrick, that tells me they're taking a quarterback with the 15th pick or higher. That's what that tells me. They're not signing Ryan Fitzpatrick to go try to win with Ryan Fitzpatrick. That's not who Ryan Fitzpatrick is. That's not who he's ever been. That's not what that signing is.
Right. That's a good point. And I don't know. I feel like a lot of people that I see, in my question, when I get questions, when I get replies about Ryan Fitzpatrick, think that the Patriots could go out there and win 11 games with Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, that's not it. The question is, when we talk about the bridge guy, who is going to be the best facilitator to put that rookie quarterback in the best place to succeed right away? I don't know that there's a better option than Ryan Fitzpatrick. Maybe Alex Smith. I think that they're kind of 1A and 1B there. I'd go Fitzpatrick just a little bit ahead of Smith because if he gets hurt, right, if Smith gets hurt, you have to rush the rookie quarterback in. Fitzpatrick's proven to be more durable. But is there a better teacher? Is there a better true bridge guy? Not a better quarterback, not a better chance of winning, but is there a better true bridge guy by the definition of the word than Ryan Fitzpatrick out there? Again, I think Smith maybe, but that's it.
Right. So my question is do you want to go in the route of a high-end bridge guy like a Derek Carr who I don't know if you're going to say to Derek Carr, here's a 5-year contract and we want you to be the quarterback for the next half decade here in New England, but you're definitely going to get better production out of a guy like a Derek Carr than you would out of a guy like Ryan Fitzpatrick. So at least your short-term ceiling is a little bit higher in that regard. And I just feel like with Fitzpatrick, first of all, and some of them are not good turnovers, but they don't count. They don't hurt as much as others. But Ryan Fitzpatrick is equally a turnover machine. We talk about Cam being a turnover machine at times last year. Ryan Fitzpatrick is right up there in terms of turnover machine. I think that's a big question mark, though, is what's the goal, right? Is the goal to just bridge the gap, or is the goal to compete and bridge the gap?
So what I would say is, I mean, what do you think Ryan Fitzpatrick's going to cost you? Just give me a number.
What, $6 to $8 million? $6
to $8 million. Derek Carr, I believe, is around 22 million, 20 million, $22 million cap hit. And we've talked about this. One of the biggest advantages of having a rookie quarterback is or a quarterback on a rookie deal is you get to go spend all this money elsewhere and help that guy.
Right.
Having a $22 million bridge guy, doesn't that kind of negate that advantage? And also, I'm going to get chewed out for this take. I don't think I'm in the majority in this take. If you have a guy you really believe in, not like a Jared Stidham who's a project and maybe he'll make it, maybe he won't, not a Jamie Newman, not that guy. If you have a first round top 30 quarterback pick that you really believe in, I don't know if I want a guy who's going to be more competitive as the bridge, because we saw what that did. And I know it was Fitzpatrick, but he played above and beyond. He's not going to play like that in New England. Like, that guy succeeding can really be a mental pretzel for the rookie. I want a guy who is turning the ball over, who is going to kind of open the door for the next guy. I do. I don't, if you draft
Ryan Fitzpatrick, because he'll turn the ball over, and
that's what I'm saying. Like,
for sure.
If I draft a quarter, because you mentioned the short-term outlook, and that's fair, but that's a really short-term outlook. If you're looking at 6, 8, 10 games, whatever, before the bye,
right? That's
a really short-term outlook. If I take a guy in the first round, I don't care about those 8 games. I really don't. My goal is to I am acknowledging the fact that unless you really hit it, like Justin Herbert, and not every rookie quarterback needs to be Justin Herbert to be good. Some guys don't really hit that step until year 2 or year 3. I am fine with the fact that there might be another 7 or 8 win season if I'm going with a rookie quarterback and Ryan Fitzpatrick as the bridge. I think that's something you need to be okay with. Because if you get too competitive, and look, I know it's a good problem to have 2 good quarterbacks, but if Carr comes out and he's slinging it, what does that do mentally to the rookie who's waiting to come in? And then you have to deal with the locker room schism,
right.
And who wants this guy and who wants that guy.
I think the biggest thing is if you're going for Derek Carr and you have Derek Carr on the team, then you're probably not drafting, and I hate
you're right.
You're probably not drafting a quarterback this year. You're probably not drafting the Mac Joneses of the world. You're probably go for the Patrick Mahomeses of the world, right?
Right, but you just mentioned using Carr as the bridge. That's what I'm talking about.
Right. So I'm looking at Carr as like a 2 to 3 year bridge, similar to how we would have viewed Matthew Stafford if he had come here.
Yeah.
And then what you do, I think Carr can carry you until you can take that big swing, because maybe they do fall in love with somebody in this draft and all this is a moot point, right? But if they don't love anybody in this draft, then I would rather go that route than I think with Cam Newton last year, we were on a road to nowhere. They were in the middle of the league in terms of record. They didn't really, other than Jacoby Myers and I guess Damian Harris too, but that's separately from the passing game. There wasn't a whole lot of development. N'Keal Harry obviously did not develop any further. The tight ends did not develop, the rookie tight ends. To have that kind of step there, I think is really important, to the point where in 2 years, maybe you have something in Devin Asiasi. I don't really think you will in Dalton Keene, but maybe you do have something in Devin Asiasi, and maybe you do draft somebody in the draft this year that ends up being good. And then when you get to that point, 2 to 3 years down the road, you fall in love with the quarterback, you go and you get him, and then you can hit the ground running. I just look at the way that the Chiefs did it, and you have that Alex Smith guy that's in there for a couple of years. You find Travis Kelce, you find Tyreek Hill, you develop those 2 guys, and then you have this amazing quarterback situation for the next guy. Let's get to some of these questions.
Yeah, let's get to some questions here.
Okay, so I really like this question. Would Bill trade for Jimmy G or wait for him to get cut? Because I do think that there's a leverage play here where if the Niners make a clear upgrade at the quarterback position, they're going to be the ones that have zero leverage in a trade for Jimmy G, because why is anybody going to help them get out of that contract and get out of that situation if they have Deshaun Watson on their roster, for example?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like what just happened with Goff, right? Where you're probably going to have to move a pick to pick up that contract. The other thing with Garoppolo, the dead cap did end last year, so the Niners can't cut him.
Yes.
I think if Bill thinks he's going to get cut, he's going to wait for him to get cut. Again, that's all, based on the concept that the Niners upgrade a quarterback, which I think is far from guaranteed. And I don't even know if going from Garoppolo to Carr is an upgrade. I don't think it's a major upgrade. Like, I don't know. It's not an upgrade that's worth 2 first-round picks.
No.
If they can do it for a second-round pick, then a second and a third, then maybe you're having that conversation. But I still think Jimmy Garoppolo is the starting quarterback for the Niners next year. I don't think they're going to get that upgrade. And again, they're not just going to move on from him for the sake of moving on from him. They have a competitive roster. They don't want to go back to zero at quarterback. So I think that's the argument there. I saw another one too, a little further back. So last week when we did the Q&As, we talked about Brissett versus Garoppolo. And I wanted Brissett, and I think you agreed with me, right, on that?
I would take Jimmy in that equation, but
you're going to take 3 games of Jimmy Garoppolo over 16 games of Jacoby Brissett.
I don't know what Jacoby Brissett's going to look like over 16 games. I know that,
but he's going to play 16 games.
But I know that my ceiling is a lot higher with Jimmy G.
You're going to go 4-12.
Okay.
Just like the Niners. Look at the Niners last year.
Finish. What's the question?
Somebody asked Brissett or Cam.
It's a good question.
So I'd probably go with Jacoby Brissett. I probably would.
I knew you were going to say that. I think the biggest thing with Jacoby Brissett that I have a tough time with is that, look, I went back and watched that tape. I think it was 2018 that he started games for Indianapolis, and he looked okay. But I think what you worry about with him is the accuracy within 20 yards. He actually throws a pretty good deep ball, but in terms of the accuracy within 20 yards of the line of scrimmage, I don't know if it's that much better or that much more consistent than what we saw out of Cam when Cam was at least whole. Yeah, I think towards the end of the season it unraveled on Cam, and I think that he would do better in a better situation with improved weapons and all that kind of stuff. So I would lean. It's tough because I think Cam is really a road to nowhere, and I think that at this point that Cam is probably not going to get back to that peak Cam level ever again. Jacoby Brissett, maybe there's a little bit more uncertainty, unknown of that upside. I would lean towards Cam, but I think it's an interesting kind of segue into another question that I wanted to present here, which was any developmental QBs in the draft that we like this year, because I think this is a really interesting conversation of if the goal or if the idea is to bring back Cam in any capacity, who are you pairing him with from the draft is important, I think, because I think there is some element of Cam and Mac Jones are just 2 completely different polar opposite sides of the spectrum. So where are you going to go with that? And there is a developmental QB in the draft. I think you already know who I'm going to say, but I'm curious if you like any of these guys.
Yeah, I just see a bunch of Jarrett Stidhams or worse at this point. I mean, if you want to move on from Jarrett Stidham and kind of try to roll the dice again with one of these guys, whether it's, I know you like Kellen Mond or Sam Ellinger or Felipe Franks or whoever, fine. But we just went down this road with Jarrett Stidham where everybody twisted themselves into pretzels, convincing themselves this 4th-round pick who was super inconsistent in college was suddenly the next Tom Brady, who, by the way, had a very successful college career. Was not benched because he couldn't play well. He was benched because of issues with scholarships from time to time. So I see that parallel drawn all the time. It doesn't exist. If we want to go down, if you want to reset and go down this road again, fine. But just understand, this isn't just because the Patriots take a quarterback doesn't mean the quarterback's the next guy. If they take Kellen Mond in the 4th round, it's no different than Jarrett Stidham. There's a guy with a couple of traits they like, the arm, the supposed football IQ, although that didn't really show up on tape. And you see what you have there. And maybe he hits, maybe he doesn't. He probably doesn't. So I don't there are a couple developmental guys I liked last year. I don't see it in this group. I really don't. There's some guys next year I think will go in later rounds. This is not a great year to go for a developmental quarterback. You already have Jarrett Stidham on the roster. You really don't need to add another one. I
I
wouldn't
don't
touch
even
it
feel like they have.
unless you trade Stidham.
I don't feel like they have Stidham on the roster because I know Stidham's not the guy. I know he's not the answer. I know he's not going to be a long-term solution.
But none of these guys are either. Like,
So,
realistically, none of
let me
these
get
guys
my
are
Kellen
either.
Mond take, okay? Because
Okay.
I'm not necessarily the highest on Kellen Mond either, but I have a feeling that they're going to be high on him in one Patriot place because he checks a lot of their sort of intangible type of boxes. And whether you care about that stuff or not, it is what it is. 3-year starter in the SEC, in a Power 5 conference, with a pro-style coach in Jimbo Fisher in a pro-style program, and he's got the game experience that they like. He does take care of the ball relatively well. And he does have the physical traits that they can fall in love with. The arm strength, some mobility. He's not Lamar Jackson, but he can move around just a little bit. Now, like what you said, this high football IQ that they were talking a lot about at the Senior Bowl is something that I did not see on tape either. I saw a guy that stared down a lot of reads, that had a tough time getting through a full field progression. But at the same time, everybody says you get this guy on the whiteboard and he knows exactly what he's talking about. And to me, I actually think thought that the Jarrett Stidham pick was ridiculous at the time, and I still think it's ridiculous. I would be much higher on Kellen Mond coming in here as that developmental type of project quarterback than I was on Jarrett Stidham when they drafted him.
But it's the same idea. It's the same idea. It's the same idea, and the definition of insanity is doing the same thing multiple times and expecting different results. And I know he's a different person. I get that. And he's a different quarterback, and he's had different experiences, but that shouldn't be, if they do that, like if your goal is Ryan Fitzpatrick and then that's your guy, like that's a problem. If you're doing that, you better already have like a solid guy in place to play quarterback. I'm not pairing Kellen Mond with Cam Newton. You're just spinning your wheels at that point. You had that last year with Cam Newton and Jarrett Stidham, and you wouldn't play Stidham. So you're just spinning the wheels on that. I don't see it. I'll let you answer this one because
the reason why I mentioned Kellen Mond and why I liked him as a mid-round guy for them is because they, for better or worse, they put a ton of emphasis on game experience.
So here's my question. Do you like him as a player or do you just like the odds they draft him?
I like the odds.
Those are two different things.
I like the odds they draft him because we've mentioned this before. You and I have mentioned how annoying it is that they like to take SEC quarterbacks that we're not crazy about. And this Kellen Mond written.
Get ready for Bo Nix next year. Go ahead.
Yeah, and Trey Lance is a guy that does not check their measurables boxes. He's a 1-year starter in the FCS of all things, not an FBS level program. And if they drafted Trey Lance, and I love Trey Lance as a prospect, and I'm pointing out all these flaws, but I actually have him graded super high. But if they drafted Trey Lance, it would be completely outside of their box. Completely. He is not at all the type of quarterback that they have ever invested a heavy pick in or heavy amount of money in or anything like that. He's not Jimmy Garoppolo. He's not even Jacoby Brissett. He's a completely different style of quarterback than all of those guys. He's really the closest thing is maybe like Cam, but Cam is Cam. It's a really different type of conversation. And I'm telling you, I would love Trey Lance. I think he's a great player, but it is not the type of guy that they are going to go for in the first round. A guy that only has 1 year of experience in a low level of football is just not the Patriots way. It's not the way that they go about it in the draft at all.
Yeah, I agree. And just to circle back on something, because I just want to clarify what you said. So, because again, there is a difference. So you think there's a good chance they take Kellen Mond, but you wouldn't be a fan of that pick.
I'm not a super high on it. I'd be definitely more excited about Kellen Mond than I was about Jarrett Stidham a few years ago.
And I would too.
But at the same time, we're still kind of banging our head against the wall with the same sort of thing.
Because I feel like sometimes people, they get super into the idea. Like this happened with Keenan Reynolds a couple of years ago, right? The Navy quarterback, where a player seems like an obvious fit for the Patriots. So people talk themselves into loving the player just because they want to be right about and I'm not saying this is what you're doing, but just because I've fallen into this trap. I'm sure you've fallen into this trap. We've all fallen into this trap. A guy making sense for the Patriots and a guy being a good player aren't necessarily the same. They can be. There can be like Kadarius Toney makes a ton of sense for the Patriots, is a good player. Boom. Kellen Mond makes a ton of sense for the Patriots, wouldn't necessarily be the best pick. So just because you think a guy is like a prototypical Patriots draft pick, and I'm just, you being the general, just be careful because you don't talk yourself into a guy just because you want to be right and say, I knew they draft him. Like, look for good football players. You can look for obvious picks too, And then when that guy gets taken by Miami or, another organization where there's a Patriots disciple, I took victory laps when Josh McDaniels drafted Tim Tebow, for instance. Like you can kind of do, or when, like that kind of thing. You can do your victory lap on that because it's like, oh, somebody from the Patriots system took him. But just be careful about, I would warn everybody when you're discussing the draft, because I see this start Twitter brawls all the time. I'm trying to be peacemaker here. Make sure you differentiate. I think they'll take him, and I think he's a good player, because they're two different conversations.
Okay, so yes, we have never been in this situation. I understand that. I'm just telling you, I love Trey Lance. My thread is up on Trey Lance. You can all go watch it on my Twitter account. I think he's a great, talented player. Be completely outside of their box to go ahead and draft a guy like that from the FCS in the first round. Let's go with Go Get His question here about how much do you think it would take to go up into the top 10? He mentions maybe pairing Gilmore and some other players maybe with picks to move up into the top 10. We've talked about this a little bit, but let's say the Patriots do fall in love with one of these quarterbacks at the top of the draft. What are you willing to give up, or what do you think they will need to give up in order to get up there?
So I don't think – so the guys you're talking about, they're not trading up. We're just going to rule out Lawrence and Fields. Like, they're not trading up for those guys. Those guys are locked in 1-2.
Although a lot of mock drafts these days has Justin Fields. I know it's just for clicks and attention, I think, with a lot of these mocks. But if you listen to guys like Lance Zierlein, Todd McShay, there are some differing opinions.
So, okay. So like, let's say this hypothetically, like when we say trade up, right? When this question gets asked, I'm assuming the context is Zach Wilson and Trey Lance, right?
Yep.
I'm personally not a fan of either for some of the reasons you named. I don't, and I know Josh Allen just went off and had the season he had, whatever. I'm not a huge fan of small school quarterbacks. I think there's something to be said for a guy who played in the SEC, for a guy who played in the Big Ten, for a guy who's played in front of 100,000 people on national TV at 8 p.m. on a Saturday at that position. I don't view other positions that way, but when you're the quarterback and you have game day on campus all week talking to you and that pressure's there, like that's different. You have to be built different to handle that. I'm not saying I wouldn't take a small school quarterback, but I put stock in that. So at that point, if I have to pay a ton to move up into the top 10 and get one of those guys, or I can take my chance at Mac Jones at 15 being just like average or above average, I'm going to do that. Now, if Fields is in play, that's a different conversation. I'm willing to pay at that point. And you know what the reality is? I think what I think, there's a reason that I'm not the one making the decisions and they are down at One Patriots Place. If they believe Wilson or Lance, or if they can get to Fields as their guy, there is nothing you can give up that's too much to get the guy that you believe is the guy, right? Nobody, the Chiefs gave up a ton to get that pick they took Patrick Mahomes with. Nobody has ever questioned whether or not they gave up too much. They probably at the time did, based on what we knew. And Mahomes had a lot of question marks at the time. He answered them, but he had a lot of question marks at the time. That was a curious trade at the time. Nobody's talking about it now. So if the Patriots really believe that Wilson's the guy or Lance is the guy, or if they can go up and get Fields and believe he's the guy, then they should pay. They should blank check, pay what it costs. At the same time, if they're not truly sold on any of those guys and want to take a quarterback in the first round, then you take Mac Jones. Don't burn assets on somebody you're not 100% sure in, because if that guy isn't the answer, you're going to need those assets to go get his replacement. And then you don't have them. So that's why, and I'm just using Mac Jones. It's not, and I do like Mac Jones, but it's not so much that I love Mac Jones at 15. It's that they're picking 15th and he'll probably be the best quarterback on the board. If they were picking 25th, I'd be using Kyle Trask in this context. Right. Like you don't sell the house. You don't go all in unless you have pocket aces. If you really believe one of those guys is the guy, spend whatever it takes. No price is too high. But even if you're not totally sure, if all three of them have enough question marks that you have to think about it, then don't make that trade. Then wait, take Mac Jones, sign somebody to a 1-year deal, go back next year, try to get Phil Dracovic, try to get Spencer Rattler, whoever, if you think that guy exists next year.
Yeah, and the reason why I brought up Fields is, and listen, it's February 4th. We have a long, long way to go until we're picking in the first round in the draft. But a lot of teams, I'm telling you, a lot of teams are going to have Zach Wilson over Justin Fields in their on their board at quarterback. A lot of teams will, and Zach Wilson is, for a lot of reasons, is a much cleaner prospect than Justin Fields. He has more experience, in-game experience. He's a little bit more scheme versatile, I would say. Justin Fields, you're going to have to put that guy in a spread offense that has some college elements to it, right? You're not going to be able to run a ton of under center stuff. You're not going to be able to run a wide zone bootleg action type of offense like your Kyle Shanahan with him necessarily. I think he could do it, certainly, if you wanted him to, but it's definitely not the best way to go about it.
So I would just say, and again, I probably phrased that poorly, but the question was about the top 10. There's going to be at least 3 quarterbacks who go in the top 5. And those picks, right. The Patriots don't have what it takes.
So the question is that we proposed this earlier this week too. If you flip Gilmore for an end of the first round pick, and then you have 15 and let's just say 29 for argument's sake here, that could then you add in a third round pick in 2022. That's probably going to be enough to get you to somewhere around 8 or 9 or something.
I still don't think that's going to be enough to get any of the top 4 guys.
It probably won't be. Maybe I think Trey Lance might still be on the board at that point in time. Maybe. I think Fields, Wilson, I think those guys are gone. But I'm just from what I'm hearing early on, and again, it's early. There's going to be teams that are going to pick Zach Wilson over Justin Fields. That's just it's just a stylistic preference in a lot.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I'm sorry, I'm pulling up the draft order here real quick because, when we talk about getting into the top 10, I think you're talking about 7 to 10 for the Patriots because Jacksonville, that picks a quarterback. That's a lock. The second pick is a lock because it's either going to be the Jets or it's going to be a Houston team without Deshaun Watson. So I think that's a lock. Then you get to 3. That is either, that's either Miami, that's probably going to be, that could be a quarterback. That could either be, if Deshaun Watson goes to Miami
every year where we think there's going to be 3, 4, 5 quarterbacks taken in the top 5. And there's always other guys, the Penny Sewells of the world or whatever. Maybe one of the wide receivers sneaks in there. There's always somebody else that gets drafted at that point. If there is a slide, I think that Justin Fields has a chance of at least getting into the back end of the top 10. And maybe they can get into that conversation. Let's pull up some more questions, though.
Do you want to get to you want to talk some wide receivers? We've been doing, I feel like, quarterbacks for 3 straight shows. Should we do some wide receivers? There we go. Where'd that question go? I missed the question. I just know there was it was Jumbo or something.
So there was a question. There's a couple different wide receiver questions. Let's go with Sander Rubens is asking about Corey Davis in free agency. We can use this as a jumping off point. I've talked about Corey Davis a little bit in the past as sort of that. To me, Corey Davis can be kind of like a souped-up version of what Brandon LaFell brought to the Patriots in 2014 as that outside guy that can certainly win outside the numbers, use his size, run some good routes for you. I think Davis has a little bit of a higher ceiling, and you would hope so, given the money that you're going to hand out to him. But I don't mind Davis as a fit here for New England.
Yeah, I talked about this on one of the previous shows that as a put like my plan at wide receiver, if I'm the Patriots, I'm not paying Allen Robinson $20 million. I'd rather go out and get like a $15 million guy and a $5 million guy. You need more than one piece, right? So I think Corey Davis, because he's probably going to be like 11, 12 million, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, probably.
Right. So, I mean, you get him as the first half of that, and then you go out, you get like a $7, $8, $9 million receiver. Suddenly you're putting a wide receiver core together, and that's what the Patriots need to do. So I think a guy like Corey Davis, who's going to be in that low to mid double digits in terms of the contract, that's the kind of guy they need to look at least from a budgeting standpoint, a team building standpoint. You could speak more to the stylistic aspect than you just did, but as I'm kind of looking at asset management and where they need to go, Corey Davis is that perfect kind of upper mid-tier, not top tier, upper mid-tier wide receiver that they need to be very serious about, or I should say is one of the multiple types of those wide receivers. Because ideally you'd get like 2 Corey Davises, and that would be, or maybe a Corey Davis and a guy slightly above that, maybe like a Juju Smith-Schuster kind of player. But that's where I'm looking. That's the route I'm looking for them to go in free agency. So yeah, for me, Corey Davis, in terms of asset management, fits super well into the ideal plan of the offseason.
I agree. I think that Corey Davis is that perfect tier 2.5, tier 2, whatever you want to call him, wide receiver. It's not Allen Robinson. It's not the prize of free agency. It's not Kenny Golladay, but it's that sort of next wave of guys. And I think that he would be a really good fit here in their X position because he's just a guy that runs a lot of the routes already that they ask out of that spot anyways. And it's not necessarily a position, unless they have Randy Moss or Brandon Cooks running there, that has been a super high volume position unless you demand the targets. So I think Corey Davis could do all that. Youngblood, I don't know if this is a question necessarily, but he brought up Pitts or Waddle. And I think that if you're sitting there at 15, the Patriots are not going quarterback, and both Kyle Pitts and Jalen Waddle are on the board. This is maybe the hardest decision that you could possibly have to make in this year's draft. And I go back and forth on this every single day.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, it's kind of, the question is, and we've talked about this off the air, there's going to need to be some retooling of the Patriots offense. I think last year they learned that they can't run the system they were running without Tom Brady. No quarterback can do it. Whether that's minor tweaks or a complete overhaul of the playbook, that's up to Josh McDaniels. There's really no way to know what the answer to that is going to be. There's pros and cons to each, right? We won't know until we see it. So I think some of that depends on what they want the offense to look like next year. Do they want to stay? Because part of the problem is they were running what's supposed to be a tight end heavy offense without a tight end. So if you want to kind of keep that flavor, that little kind of niche to your offense with a tight end does have such importance, then I think Pitts is the no-brainer. If you want to kind of mold yourself into more of the modern offense, kind of like what the Chiefs run, what the Niners run, then it's Waddle. You have Waddle's injury concern, so that's a negative on him. With Pitts, you really handcuff yourself at the tight end position. You would have 4 tight ends on rookie contracts. Ryan Izzo's deal you can maybe get out of, but I mean, that's it for adding a tight end. You really can't spend any more resources there for the next 3 years. And as good as Pitts projects to be, that's a risk. So, you could go back and forth, it's not quite chicken or the egg, but you get what I'm saying. Like, it all comes down to philosophy at that point. What do you want your roster to look like? What do you want your offense to look like? What kind of quarterback are you planning on having? I don't think there's a wrong answer. I just think there's so much context needed to answer that question, and we don't have any of that context right now, so it's tough.
Yeah, and I think the biggest question with Kyle Pitts is, are the Patriots going to buy into using him correctly? Because you have to use him like Travis Kelce,
right? So that's the other point.
Gronkowski. I actually think that he has flashes where he does block decently well. He's not a great blocker by any means, but he has some flashes. But you're not going to use him in that capacity at the NFL level. So if you can buy into using him as a move piece, as a big jumbo slot receiver, essentially, and sometimes you can even flex him all the way out. And if you can get your offense into that groove, then he is, and for my money, the surest and best pass catcher in this draft, just overall pass catching talent. But Jalen Waddle, and this is why I go back and forth on it so many times, adds such a speed dynamic to this offense. And I don't even know if Brandon Cooks necessarily did that for them, because Cooks was a vertical threat, but you weren't handing the ball off to him. You weren't throwing swing passes to him. You weren't.
Well, they tried.
They tried, and it didn't go well. Waddle's the type of guy like Tyreek Hill, who is a 3-level burner. You can give it to him in the backfield. You can have him go on a little motion screen into the flat. You can have him run a crosser over the middle of the field, or you can have him run vertical routes in the 3rd level of the defense, and he can stretch the field in all capacities. And if they had a guy like that, then even if they don't have a huge upgrade at tight end and slot receiver, let's say they go into it next year and they have Jalen Waddle, maybe they grab a Jonnu Smith or something like that at tight end, but not some prize tight end in the free agent market, and they have Jacoby Myers in the slot, the middle of the field is going to be much, much more available to you if you have a guy like Jalen Waddle running around versus if you don't. And my fear with getting a guy like Kyle Pitts, as great as a matchup weapon as he is you still don't have that element of your offense of who is taking the top off, who is stressing the defense horizontally on a speed plane, who's doing that for you they're going to just still crowd the line of scrimmage, get up in people's faces. They'll put a guy over on Kyle Pitts' side of the field, and I still think it's going to be a slog of an offense. I think Jalen Waddle opens your offense up more. I think Kyle Pitts is a more natural fit into what they do, though. And I think they have had history because Gronk was both. Gronk was an inline blocker and a move tight end. So if you take the move tight end tree out of Rob Gronkowski's playbook and you give it to Kyle Pitts, then I think that they have had success with that type of player already. Whereas with Waddle, they've never really had that type of guy. You know, that's no disrespect to Brandon Cooks. Randy Moss is just his completely own cyborg edition of nobody.
Right. Nobody's Randy Moss.
Right. So really, they've never had a Jalen Waddle.
And I think the other thing, too, to add, because you touched on this a little bit, and then when I mentioned the asset management and drafting 3 tight ends in 2 years, everybody's comparing Pitts to Travis Kelce. Bill Belichick, remember, believes Travis Kelce is a wide receiver. When you ask him about Travis Kelce, he refers to him as a wide receiver. He's not the only one. He does the same thing with Mike Gesicki, too, right? Does Bill think he's drafting Kyle Pitts as a tight end? I wouldn't be surprised if the Patriots drafted Kyle Pitts, if all of a sudden, we get to training camp and he's listed on the roster as a wide receiver.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that. The other day that I think that they might like Pat Freiermuth a little bit more just for their style. I'm not saying they're going to draft Pat Freiermuth at 15 over Kyle Pitts, but they might wait until day 2 for Pat Freiermuth or the end or trade down or something like that and pass on Pitts, or Pitts goes early and they don't have a chance of getting him. I could see, because Freiermuth is that do it all, put your hand in the ground and block somebody or catch a ball. He is that all around tight end. But there we did get a question from
just one more to tack on the end of that. First off, you can wait even more and get Miller Forrestall from Alabama. But the flip side of that conversation, so you mentioned wait and get Freiermuth instead of Pitts.
Yeah,
is if you want to kind of flip it, you can wait on Waddle and get Kadarius Toney. So they both kind of have that equivalent.
Yeah, Waddle is this draft has 3 guys that I think can really stretch the field on a different level. It's like Waddle's like the tier A1 guy, Kadarius Toney is like kind of the tier 2, and then Rondale Moore is like the tier 3 guy, right? And you can kind of
don't sleep on Jalen Darden.
Jalen Darden is like the early day 3, late day 2, early day 3.
I know. I'm screwing with
I know. I actually think Darden should be in the conversation too. I think he's going to be at the end of the 3rd round type of guy.
So you finally watched him?
I have watched him, and
nice.
That guy can play. And I think that those 3 guys, and the Patriots will end up taking Rondale Moore, who's always hurt, and they'll say Rondale Moore in the 3rd round is better value than Jalen Waddle in the 1st round. But I want to get to this question by Ryan Sullivan about the tight ends: Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, Zach Ertz. Who are you taking?
Oh, well, okay. So there's the weird variable there is, what am I giving up to get Zach Ertz, right? Can I swap him for Gilmore 1-for-1? That's been my dream trade the whole offseason. I've been saying that since I think October, is that's the trade they should look to pull off. So, if that's it, I'm all in. If I'm trading the 1st round, if I have to give up the 1st round pick, then I'm probably looking more at Hunter Henry or Jonnu Smith. Hunter Henry, the injuries are certainly a concern, but knowing that one's weird too, because normally you look at a guy who's hurt as much as him, you say, no, thank you. But we now know that the Chargers medical staff is like a total mess. It has been for years and is beyond anything we could have ever imagined. So, we talk about a guy maybe becoming better with a new coach in place and in a new system. Is Hunter Henry going to be better just with a better medical staff? So it's a really interesting question. I'm going to use the same cop-out answer I used before. We don't have a lot of context, and I think some of it depends on what you want to do stylistically.
Yeah.
If that's if you're fine with your big money off-season pass catcher being a tight end, and you don't want to go out and spend 10 to 12 million on a wide receiver, then I think Henry makes a ton of sense. If you want a guy like a Juju Smith-Schuster, like a Corey Davis, then you probably have to do Jonnu Smith. And again, what are you trading for Zach Ertz? That to me is, I'd love him. I think he's a good player. I think he's a fantastic fit here. But just to say, yeah, I'd rather have him than Hunter Henry. I mean, and I don't know whoever asked that question. If you want to come back in and give me, like, hypothetically, am I trading the pick? Am I trading Gilmore? Am I trading JC Jackson? Whatever. Like, that conversation evolves a little bit more for me.
Yeah, I think Jonnu Smith is a great fit for them. He's a little bit undersized from what they would typically want in an inline tight end, but if they want him if they want to use him properly as an inline slash like H-back type, like the Titans have used him all over the formation. They put him in the backfield some. They've done a bunch of different things with him. If you want him to come in here, and we always bring up this name, and we hate to bring up the name, but if you want to use him like they used Hernandez, and you want to move him around the formation, get him some matchups in different spots and things like that, then I think he can be effective. If you want him to be Gronk and just run up the seam, then he's the wrong guy for that, right? He's not that type of player.
Then you got to pay Hunter Henry.
But I like Jonnu Smith value a little bit better because I don't think he's going to cost you as much. All right. We really appreciate all the questions. You can come back next Thursday and we're going to do it all over again with more questions we're going to say.